Cek, bos. Masuk nggak?
Masuk.
Sip, sip. Piul, baterai belum, Piul. 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 Baterai habis itu.
Tes 1. Tes. Tes satu. Tes. Satu. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome Dr. Calum to our university. And ladies and gentlemen, the opening ceremony is going to start soon on 10 minutes. For our esteemed invitee in the staff room, please be seated. And for our guests in the Zoom conference, we welcome your participation. And please feel free to ask our panelists in the Zoom chat in any time during the event.
Excellencies, distinguished person, distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon you. Good morning, and we are delighted to welcome you to the guest lecture of Department of Forensic Medicine and Medicolegal, University of Indonesia. On behalf of the organizers, we would like to extend our warm welcome to the distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, for giving your honored presence to our mini interactive seminar on abortion, women's rights, and respecting life from fertilization on physician's oath, the ethical consideration. I'm Olga.
And I am Nadia.
We are your hosts for today, and we are honored to welcome our panelists and speakers.
Professor Dr. Fahrial Syam, Gastroenterohepatology Specialist, Dean of Faculty of Medicine, University of Indonesia.
Dr. Ade Firmansyah Sugiharto, Forensic and Medicolegal Specialist, Head of Forensic Medicine and Medicolegal Department, who will also be the esteemed moderator of our event.
Professor Dr. Agus Purwadianto, Forensic and Medical Legal Specialist, Professor of Forensic Medicine and Medical Legal Department.
And our honored guest speaker from the UK, Dr. Calum Miller, Bachelor of Arts, Honors, Master of Arts, Bachelor of Medicine and Surgery, and all of our invitee participants and guests today.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to listen to the opening speech delivered by the Head of Forensic Medicine and Medical Legal Department. Please welcome Dr. Ade Firmansyah Sugiharto to officially open this mini seminar.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The distinguished Professor Dr. Fahrial Syam as the Dean of Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Indonesia, who is now represented by Dr. Yuli Budiningsih as the Secretary of Faculty. The distinguished guest, Dr. Calum Miller, thank you for having you here, from University of Oxford and Canopy Global Foundation. The distinguished Professor Dr. Agus Purwadianto, also as the former Ethics Council in Indonesian Medical Association, and also distinguished Dr. Bukovisa as also the former Ethics Council, Chairman of Ethics Council, Indonesian Medical Association. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very delightful to invite you all to attend this very delightful meeting seminar on abortion, women's rights, and also respecting life from fertilization. Today's guest lecture, we will discuss. We were very delightful to have Dr. Calum Miller, because the discussion on abortion, women's rights, and also the respecting of life is a very long discussion among the proponents of pro-life and pro-choice. So we are we would like to invite all the have a fruitful discussion on these topics, and also discuss and how we will, as a physician, have a standing point on these topics, and also have a very great ethical consideration. That's all from me. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Ade. And now for the opening speech by Professor Dr. Agus Purwadianto. Prof. Agus is the Professor of Forensic Medicine and Medical Legal Department and currently serves as the Chairman of Makersi, PP Kestraki, and Apkesi. Here is his curriculum vitae shown on the screen. Please welcome Prof. Agus to the stage.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, selamat pagi. This is an honor for me to stand here to make such kind of opening speech as like a brief introduction about all of the topic that we can learn from our distinguished guest, Dr. Calum Miller. He is the expert of bioethics from Oxford University, and hopefully we will get more enlightenment from Dr. Miller, and also we have an opportunity to discuss more deepen with our Indonesian culture or Indonesian situation. And hopefully all of the audience here in either in this room and also in the online will follow the discussion well. Yeah. I think our slide there, my slide. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I will also talk about the ethical legal aspect of women's reproduction. Yeah. And this is the very hot topic and very popular among, especially from Indonesia. Then, and the role of forensic and medical legal expert in this kind of topic, we can see, yeah, in this slide here. Forensic medicine specialists usually have a sensitivity in end of life, because we are, as a pathologist, usually deal with the dead body. Yeah? But in this context, in the abortion, I think Dr. Miller will make a comprehensive lecture. We talk about the beginning of life. Yeah? And forensic, as medical legal, also talking about the caring with dignity or without dignity. So at that moment, because we are also dealing with the malpractice issue, so in this topic is very close with the caring without dignity. And I think Dr. Miller will talk about that. Yeah. Yeah. Reproductive health policy, yeah? Does it necessarily favor the ideological front of supporting the human's essential right to life, Hasuko, the pro-life credo? Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, to answer this, we must return to the very basis of physician's oath, the notion that doctors will devote their profession for the sake of humanity. Medical ethics, which is currently codified in 2012, Code of Indonesian Medical Ethics, or Kode Etika Kedokteran Indonesia, is influenced Immanuel Kant School of Moral Philosophy, specifically the ethics of duty, known as deontology. This is the ethical theory that says actions are good or bad according to a clear set of rules. To respect life from fertilization is still a major part of Indonesian physicians' oath, despite the changes made in other countries in this regard, namely a change of phrase to respect life from the first sign of life. Even the World Medical Association, we know that there's a great conference in Jakarta, maybe last month, yeah, avoided this hard stance with their phrasing of their 9 July 2018 Hippocratic Oath. I will maintain the utmost respect for human life. In principle, the side of the pro-life movement in reproductive health policies is supported by morality, ethics and laws, medical profession, also the current medical legal laws, and lastly, criminal law. This is further implemented by the pro-life movement's support of providing medical counsel for pregnant women that seek abortion in healthcare facilities, known as safe abortion. However, partly caused by the many roots of problem in abortion. That is to say, unwanted pregnancies. It is in my observation that the incentives of our public policies is inconsistent. In regard, the ideas of women's rights, especially the right to reproductive freedom, we can see that the root of unwanted pregnancies partly comes from their own reproductive awareness or shortage thereof. Our generation of Indonesian millennial women are deprived of sex and health education from doctors and healthcare providers. So we must remember that they are the victims of our patriarchal reproductive policy. The slide before. No. Yeah, okay. In respect, the essential right to life, we are in need of the incentive of both the government, medical profession, and private or non-governmental institution. These are implemented by creating the destigmatized shelters of pregnant women in need, reproductive centers, pre-wedding and couple counseling services, and the institution to both humanly adopt and educate children born of unwanted pregnancies. All of these services are enveloped by reproductive health efforts that can only be actualized by the collective work of multiple governments, ministries, and institutions. These efforts need to have a significant impact, and notably for the public, including in social media. Yeah, but unfortunately in Indonesia, these efforts still leave much to be desired. Yeah. And so there is a significant gap in between health policies, pro-life norm, and the actual pro-life implementation in real life. Sociologically, our public policies regarding abortion are based from the ethics theory of teleology or consequentialism, both of which are in support of the pro-choice principles. Currently, women with unwanted pregnancy are forced to turn to unsafe abortion because the inability of healthcare services to provide for them, in fear of being labeled as an illegal facility. Why? Because the government has yet to assign healthcare facilities that can legally give these women medically indicated abortion under the protection of law. In the end, the lack of governing in regard to the abortion services are suffered by women who have to pay the more expensive, unregulated fees of unsafe abortion. Speaking again from the set of healthcare services providers, we are also facing an incomplete regulation in deciding and treating pregnancies that requires medically indicated abortion. This causes an ethico-medico-legal burden and issues to healthcare services that, under a good cause, provides a lege artis medically indicated abortion. In a sense, medical professionals in reproductive health have an unsettled debt that is the moral obligation to code an all-encompassing reproductive health policy that includes a flourishing family resilience or ketahanan kesehatan keluarga. Yeah. In this same time, the medical profession also play a role in decreasing the maternal mortality rate, answering the ethical dilemma of conception point of life with the bioethic and humanities laboratorium. That is a new concept in the medical faculty, and developing a continuing medical education to explore the sad ethical dilemma. It is time for us to encourage the collective awareness in regard to the respect of life by the method of professional retribution. Yeah, in this slide, because you know that this is like an endemic situation, that dilemma between pro-life and pro-choice. The slide here, a simple slide that according to the Health and Human Rights from the WHO, the issue of women's rights should be increased or alleviated with the civil and political rights. Next slide. Yeah, this is the final, and this is the position that we propose, that teaching method via the bioethics and humanities laboratory is very important among medical students to get the professionalism as a good collective action by using many of bioethics situation, and also sensitivity to human dignity and vulnerability and human rights as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Agus, for the statement. And so now we are happy to announce that our interactive guest lecture and discussion today will be moderated by our very own head of department. As you all have already met him, please let me reintroduce Dr. Ade.
Okay, Dr. Ade Firmansyah Sugiharto graduated as a medical doctor from Faculty of Medicine, University of Indonesia in 2005, finished his forensic and medical legal specialist in 2009 with a cum laude honor. Dr. Ade has taken part in the fellowship program in the School of Law, University of Washington, and finally graduated his doctoral program from Faculty of Medicine, University of Indonesia in 2017. Currently, Dr. Ade works as forensic and medical legal specialist in Cipto Mangunkusumo Hospital, a full-time lecturer and head of forensic medicine and medical legal department, University of Indonesia. He is also a chairman of Indonesian Association of Forensic Medicine, or as we known as PDFI. He had published and contributed to multiple papers, one of which is published in Journal of Asian Bioethics Review. He also had received numerous awards from several institutions. We are honored to have you. Over to you, Dr. Ade.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our main session, an interactive seminar on topic of abortion, women's rights, and respecting life from fertilization on physician's oath, brought by our guest speaker, the Honorary Dr. Calum, BA, Honorary MA, BM, BCH. Please allow me to first read a short CV of Mr. Miller. Dr. Calum Miller graduated from University of Oxford Medical School in 2005 and works as a medical doctor in the UK. He also teaches philosophy at the University of Oxford, where his research focuses on abortion policy. He also holds a master's degree with distinction in biblical studies. Dr. Miller has taken part in multiple debates against the CEO of the UK's largest private abortion provider. He has published on a variety of topics, including maternal mortality, abortion, and mental health. He has received prizes from the University of Oxford and the Royal College of Psychiatrists for his work on bioethics. Dr. Miller has presented to a wide range of professionals and parliamentaries around the world, having spoken to various parliamentary groups and at the White House. He regularly appears in mainstream media in the UK and is currently writing 3 books on abortion. Dr. Miller now works with Canopy Global Foundations, an international foundations organization providing expert testimony and strategic advice on protecting women from human trafficking, violence against women, and abortion. He also works as a public speaker with the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics based in Oxford, England. Much of Dr. Miller's work can be found at www.calumsblog.com/abortion-QA, which include a complete database on abortion, answering any question people might have about the pro-life position. I'm happy to welcome Dr. Miller. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, and allow me to say what an honor and a privilege it is for me to be here with such distinguished company, and I very much appreciate the invitation and for your generously hosting me today. It really is an honor for me, and I'm delighted to be here. Is it possible to get the slides up for my presentation, please? Thank you. Wonderful. And the first slide? So, why are we talking about this topic here today? You will notice that I am not from Indonesia, I'm from the United Kingdom, and it's a very different culture in the United Kingdom and in Western Europe more generally, where abortion has become very widespread. It is legal in most countries in the West, but of course there is always a debate about this topic, and the recent events in the United States have shown very clearly that everywhere this is still a contested topic, that there is no consensus on this, particularly at a global level. What you can see here is a map of the world according to its abortion laws, where this is a map given by a pro-abortion organization who think that abortion should be legal on demand for any reason at any point throughout pregnancy. And so they label countries which allow abortion on demand in blue, whereas countries which have more restrictive abortion laws are in red and yellow. And so what you can see is that most of Europe, much of Central Asia and the northern parts of Asia and parts of Latin America have legalized abortion, whereas the large majority of Africa, the large majority of the Middle East, and several countries in South and Southeast Asia have not legalized abortion. Now, it might seem that this is a very different topic from the current society in Indonesia, and certainly from speaking to people in Jakarta over the last few days, I have had many people tell me that this is not an issue which is going to come up soon. We're not going to legalize abortion in Indonesia anytime soon. And I agree that my sense of the political landscape is that that's probably correct. Abortion probably will not be legalized in Indonesia within the next 5 years, for example. But what we do see is a concerted push and a gradual trend throughout much of the world in favor of legalizing abortion, even to the point where there is an enormous push for it to become an international human right. And therefore, Indonesia, sooner or later, will come under this pressure. And certainly when you look at young people's views towards abortion, there is a trend towards the pro-abortion perspective among young people. And therefore, it's important, however we feel about the current situation, to be having these debates now and to be educating ourselves now so that we are prepared for those debates when they do inevitably arise. Could I have the next slide, please? So just as an example, this is a survey from Jordan in the Middle East, a predominantly Muslim country, a conservative country. And although it does say that, and this is a survey of medical students in Jordan, and although they say that 77% of Jordanian medical students agree that every conceived child has a right to be born, there's also a significant proportion who think that the law in Jordan, a conservative Islamic country, is likely to change in the future. So nearly 40% of medical students said that the laws and legalization will support abortion in the future because of changes in the culture of society. And so it is important that we pay attention to the views of young people and that we have this debate in an informed, evidence-based way. And hopefully I can present some of that evidence today. Next slide, please. Well, where is the starting point? The starting point for this, of course, is in ethics. This is fundamentally a question of ethics and justice. And we cannot simply say that this is an issue for individual people, that only affects individual people. And the reason for that is articulated well by Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. Whatever affects one person directly affects all people indirectly. What he means is that when there is injustice in the world, we cannot simply sit back and say, that is bad for them, but I am not affected. What affects one person in an unjust way will affect the whole society, and I will present some evidence for that. Next slide. So what does justice mean? Justice means treating everybody with dignity and treating them equally. But there's also an element to justice that in the Western world we have forgotten, which is that justice is also about relationship and community. In the Western world, we see that there has been a huge move away from community and away from family and a move away from responsibility, because there is a sense that justice is all about pursuing your individual rights, whether or not it affects anyone else. But justice is fundamentally about bringing people together again and healing broken relationships, as well as treating people equally. And what we know first and foremost, and particularly any parents in the room or viewing online will know, is that when a child is harmed, their family is harmed as well. Anyone who has a child knows that when their child has been mistreated or when their child has been harmed, that is a harm to the whole family. We cannot simply say that one member of a family and another member of a family are against each other. The well-being of family and community goes together, and when a child is harmed, their family and particularly their parents and their mothers are worse off. And so the pro-life perspective isn't about picking sides in a battle between the mother and the child. In fact, the pro-life perspective has often been caught by accepting this narrative that there is a battle between the mother and the child. Now, some opponents of abortion, who might rightly be called anti-abortion, have only looked at the child and have said it doesn't matter about the mother, what matters is that the child is born. But that is not the pro-life perspective. The pro-life perspective rejects the narrative that there is a fight between mother and child, and it says that both mother and child matter infinitely, and both of them should be supported and protected, and that when we protect both of them are actually better off than they would be otherwise. So the pro-life perspective says that both lives matter. It says that women deserve better than abortion. And it says that abortion is not just an individual choice, it is a societal failure where the whole of society has failed women who have been in difficult pregnancy situations. Next slide, please. So what about abortion in my context, in the Western world? Well, this is a fairly typical picture. I use the UK as an example because the UK has very good statistics on abortion. And this is fairly typical of abortion in the Western world, where abortion is legal almost everywhere. In the UK, 1 in 3 women will have an abortion at some point in their lifetimes, which means that there are 200,000 abortions legally every year in the UK. And nearly half of these are repeat abortions, where the person has already had an abortion and is having their second or third, sometimes up to 10 abortions or more in rare cases. In pro-life countries, which limit abortion and protect women and children, we know that the law does work. There is absolutely decisive evidence showing that although abortion does still occur to an extent in pro-life countries, it occurs at a much lower rate when you adjust for the confounding factors. And so pro-life laws do work to prevent abortion. But fundamentally what this means, where 1 in 3 women in the UK will have an abortion in their lifetime, fundamentally what this means is that compassion is of utmost importance in discussing this. It means when I speak about this topic in England, it is almost inevitable that someone in the audience will have had an abortion or will have an abortion. And therefore we have to speak with utmost sensitivity and compassion, even when we share the pro-life perspective. Next slide. So I want to begin then by saying a bit about the effect of abortion on women specifically. Because as I said, abortion doesn't simply end the life of the unborn child or the embryo or the fetus. Abortion has been shown in a variety of ways to adversely affect the woman herself, as well as the wider society, in a variety of ways, and actually many more ways, which I will try and outline in brief. Next slide. The first of these ways is through sex-selective abortion. Now, UNFPA, which is the United Nations Population Fund, has traditionally been in the process of limiting population, sometimes coercively, sometimes against the choice of women. But they are generally now seen as a force for abortion and for women's choice about ending her pregnancy through ending the life of the child. Next slide. The United Nations Population Fund, although it is very pro-abortion and pro-choice, it says that 126 million women are missing around the world as a result of gender-based sex selection, a form of discrimination. But what they don't say is that one of the main reasons for this is because of the practice of sex-selective abortion, where an abortion can be performed simply because the baby is a girl. And it goes without saying that it usually is girls who have their lives ended through sex-selective abortion because of misogynistic attitudes throughout the world and for various other reasons. And so what we find, next slide, is that the number of sex-selective abortions has increased gradually as ultrasound has increased. So ultrasound technology has not been around forever, but as ultrasound technology was gradually widespread throughout the 1980s, and increasingly so, the number of missing female births has risen to nearly 2 million a year. And a missing female birth is where a baby girl has been aborted simply on the basis that she is a girl. And so what this means is that sex-selective abortion has ended about 2 million baby girls' lives every single year just because they are girls. And what this means is that abortion has been one of the most powerful tools and weapons that the patriarchy has used in order to eliminate the voice and the visibility and the presence of women in society. Next slide. Next slide again, please. This, of course, is widespread around the world. It is mostly seen as a problem in places like China and India and other parts of South Asia and actually East Asia and West Asia, but it's also in the Western world as well. So because the United Kingdom allows abortion for any mental health reason, what this means is that the UK allows abortion on demand as long as you say that your mental health would be affected. And what this means is that in the UK, if you say that having a baby girl would affect my mental health, then abortion is legal. Even though we only allow abortion for health reasons, we allow sex-selective abortion as long as someone says that having a baby girl would harm their mental health. And this has become an increasing problem in the UK because of increased screening early on in pregnancy. And in fact, we had a vote on this a few years ago to specifically ban sex-selective abortion, and the Parliament rejected this motion, and they kept sex-selective abortion being legal in the UK. Next slide, please. Of course, this doesn't just directly eliminate the presence of women in societies. It has all sorts of consequences downstream. So one of the things that my organization, Canopy Global Foundation, works on is the issue of human trafficking. And what has been noted in countries like China and India specifically is that when you have an absence of women in society, a trade of trafficking around women develops. Because, for example, in some villages in India, there have been no male babies born for several years. And what this means is that there are missing women and there are men who cannot find wives. And of course, though this is not a just solution to this problem, what ends up happening in reality is that women are trafficked and kidnapped and taken to places where they have very few women in order to be sold as wives. And so there are huge problems that arise downstream of sex-selective abortion, including many other problems. Next slide, please. Now, the second way in which legal abortion has been harmful to women and has not liberated them is because a significant proportion of abortion is coerced by other people. And this problem becomes worse when abortion is legalized. So we know that in many countries, not just Western countries, but studies from the United Kingdom, from Norway, from Gabon, from the Republic of Congo, across different contexts, all show that between 20 to 25% of abortions are because of coercion from the male partner or from the parents or from the doctors or sometimes from the abortion providers. And this is a significant minority of abortions. It would suggest that about 40 to 50,000 abortions occur in the UK every year as a result of coercion against the woman's choice. And of course, this is not pro-choice. But moreover, there is a sort of soft coercion and soft pressure that even if a woman does not feel outrightly forced or coerced to have an abortion, she may be feeling under immense pressure to have an abortion because of her circumstances. In Scotland, which is often seen as a bastion of women's rights and equality and feminism, 3/4 of pregnant women and new mothers say that they are discriminated against because they are pregnant or because they are mothers. And what this means is that a huge number of abortions happen when a woman deep down would like to keep the child, but feels that she cannot because she would be fired from her job. And this accounts for a much higher number of abortions still. So abortion is not always about a woman's choice in reality. In fact, legalized abortion can significantly hinder a woman's choice. Next slide. We know that, in fact, abortion providers themselves do pressure women. There are many stories from Planned Parenthood in America where they have set targets for the number of abortions their clinics have to perform, obviously encouraging women to have abortions. But likewise in the UK, one of our leading abortion providers, which is actually around 40 countries around the world, Marie Stopes, the hospital regulators went to observe Marie Stopes, and they found that they had a company policy of trying to make more abortions happen. So much so that if a woman went to discuss having an abortion and she decided to keep the baby, they would then call the woman up at home to try and get her to reconsider and try to have the abortion after all. And in fact, they found instances of Marie Stopes giving abortions to children without taking informed consent. They did not check that the children understood the risks. They just pushed the children to have abortions without telling the parents, without giving them informed consent. And it goes without saying that this was when they were being observed by hospital regulators. And this means that they were on their best behavior at this time. And it is somewhat scary to think how they operate when they're not being observed. Next slide. Next slide again, please. So the hospital regulators concluded, they said that staff expressed concern that they were assessed and bonuses were paid based on their performance of key performance indicators. What they essentially said is that staff at the abortion clinic were paid bonuses if they convinced more women to have abortions. And they explicitly said in their report that the staff themselves said that this worked against patient choice. And so many of these abortion providers do not fundamentally support a woman's choice. They are fundamentally about providing abortions and reaching corporate targets, often for population control reasons. And they summarize in particular, consent was routinely accepted from children without proper assessment of their ability to understand the risks, which of course is not informed consent and therefore is not really consent at all. Next slide. Next slide again. And next slide again. This is a particularly harrowing example from the UK, which again is seen as a pro-choice country. 2 years ago, a woman who was from a Nigerian background had a mental learning disability. She had a mild to moderate learning disability, so her mental age, she was about 22 years old, but her mental age was maybe about 9 or 10, and it was a bit debatable. Some said it was a bit higher than that. So this was not someone who had no communication abilities at all. This was someone who certainly had learning difficulties, but was able to communicate, was able to have preferences, was able to express those preferences, understood what a child was, and so on. And she wanted to keep her baby. The circumstances of how she got pregnant are not known, and of course it's a concerning situation that she was pregnant in the first place. But she wanted to keep the baby. And her mother was a midwife who said, we will look after the baby as a family, and we are prepared and able to do that. The social worker, and social workers in the UK are normally pro-choice and encourage abortion. The social worker said, this family is capable of taking care of a baby, and I support this woman's choice to have her baby. Well, the doctors disagreed, and the doctors said, we know that you want to have this baby, but we think it would be bad for you, and so we are going to force you to have an abortion against your will. And these were the doctors, not activists, not abusive partners, not the family. These were the doctors saying, we will force you to have an abortion against your will. And so the family disagreed and said, no, we are having this baby. It is her choice. And so the doctors took this woman to court. And the court said, you have to have an abortion against your will. Despite all the rhetoric about choice and about empowering women to make the decisions about their bodies, the doctors and the court said that it is not your choice. Abortion is good for you and you will have an abortion even if you don't want to. Now, fortunately, this story had a good ending in that it was just the night before the abortion, the woman raised funds to be able to challenge this at a higher court, and the higher court overturned this ruling. But we know that in other situations, that has not happened, and women have been forced to have abortions by their doctors and by the courts. As an example of the mentality around this in the UK, they said that to try and placate or appease the woman who didn't want to have the abortion, doctors told her that instead of having a real baby, she would be given a new doll to play with after the abortion as a compensation for taking the life of her child. Next slide. Now, the third way in which abortion is harmful for women is through the impact on women's mental health. And I should say here that you will hear very different perspectives on this question. And certainly within the Western world, within the academic community in the Western world, there is a general view that abortion is not harmful to a woman's mental health. And so I'm not pretending that my view here is uncontroversial. My view would be contested by certain people within academia. But I have looked at this in immense detail. I have looked at all the papers, or not all of them, but all the key papers on this topic, all the major reviews on this topic, to understand what exactly the evidence shows on abortion and mental health. And in fact, the evidence does show an association. In the first place, this is the conclusion of David Ferguson, who was a professor in New Zealand, and he was the world's leading authority on abortion and mental health. Every major review on this topic, if you look at the citations and you look at the major reviews which people rely on this topic, they will all say that David Ferguson's research is the best research on this topic. He is a world-leading authority on the topic of abortion and mental health. He is also pro-choice, or he passed away a few years ago, but he was pro-choice. He said that abortion should be legally available. It is a woman's right to choose. He is not pro-life. He is not biased towards pro-life research. But he was an honest psychologist, and he did one of the best study on this topic in New Zealand, and he found that at the present time, there is no credible scientific evidence that abortion has mental health benefits. Next slide. He actually, next slide again, sorry. He actually went significantly further, and he said that when you look at the evidence properly, when you control for the woman's mental health before the abortion, when you control for her socioeconomic status, when you control for the wantedness of the pregnancy, meaning that you only look at women with unwanted pregnancies, you take all of those things into account, you still find that women who have abortions have worse psychological outcomes than women who continue an unwanted pregnancy. So women who have abortions have a 30% increased risk of anxiety, a 70% increased risk of suicidal behavior, 134% increased risk of alcohol abuse, and nearly 300% increased risk of drug abuse. We also know from studies which again have been done by pro-choice researchers that the number of women who have abortion-specific post-traumatic stress disorder is between 1.5 and 14%, meaning that in a standard clinical classification, it would be classed as a common complication or even a very common complication of abortion. Now, I'm not just saying that this proportion of women have post-traumatic stress disorder, because that could be due to anything. But post-traumatic stress disorder is a good example because it is specifically tied to an event or a series of events, such as sexual abuse or car crashes or being in military contexts. Well, they found that women have specific PTSD symptoms because of the abortion specifically at a fairly common rate. And so this is obviously causally related to the abortion. Next slide, please. By contrast, what about women who continue an unwanted pregnancy or even are forced to continue an unwanted pregnancy because they are not able to obtain an abortion? Well, there was a very high-profile study done in the US by abortion advocate researchers just in the last few years, and it has got a huge amount of attention because it studied women who had sought abortions and been denied abortions, had been turned away, and therefore it was called the Turnaway Study. Well, one of the most highly publicized, one of the least publicized findings of this study is that they studied those women who had been denied an abortion And then they followed them up for 5 years. And at the 5th year, when their child was 5 years old, they said, "Do you wish that you could still have had an abortion?" And of the women who kept the baby and who raised the child, which was almost all of them, 98% of those women were glad that they did not have an abortion. And so while many women seek an abortion in a crisis context and in a moment of panic and distress, which is entirely understandable, when a woman is in a very difficult situation, it is absolutely understandable that she would want to be rid of that situation and that there should be an easy way out of that situation. When a woman is given time and the right support, 98% of those women are actually glad that they were refused an abortion and that they were forced to have their child, and they were glad that they had their child. Whereas women who had an abortion actually had higher levels of regret after their abortion. Next slide. Now, because abortion is linked with suicide in particular, and this is for multiple reasons, one of which is that pregnancy and child raising is protective against suicide, and we know that to be very well established. It turns out that actually in most developed countries and in many countries around the world, suicide is actually the leading cause of maternal death. And what this means is that the suicide rate has a significant impact on the overall mortality rates after abortion. And so you sometimes hear it claimed that abortion is much safer than childbirth because the death rate after abortion is much lower. But there are many problems with this claim, including the fact that they measure this inconsistently. So suicide is normally counted as a method of maternal death, as a cause of maternal death. And in fact, it's the leading cause of maternal death. But if a woman commits suicide after having an abortion, it is not counted as a death from abortion. And so there is a disparity in how these figures are compared. And next slide, please. This just clarifies and points out that maternal suicide is the second largest cause of direct maternal deaths within 6 weeks of the pregnancy, and is the leading cause of maternal death within a year after the pregnancy. Next slide, please. Now, this is significant because the suicide rate after abortion is so much higher than the suicide rate after completing a pregnancy. So women who are not pregnant have a certain suicide rate on the left. If a woman becomes pregnant, her suicide rate risk drops significantly to about 1/3 of that original risk. And if a woman has an abortion, her suicide risk is much, much higher than even the baseline risk. Next slide, please. And because suicide is the leading cause of maternal death, it shows the same trend when it comes to the mortality rate. That women who are not pregnant have a certain mortality rate. Women who are pregnant have a significantly lower mortality rate. And women who have abortion have a much, much higher mortality rate still. This data is from Finland, where they have legal abortion for any reason, and where they keep very good data because all the healthcare records are closely linked together and kept very close track of. Next slide, please. And again. There are other causes, of course, of maternal death, but what they found was that even when you look at physical causes alone, when you look at cardiovascular disease or direct obstetric complications, even when you look at cancer and all the other causes of direct and indirect maternal deaths, what they found was that the mortality rate after abortion and after childbirth was pretty much the same. Now, childbirth perhaps has more direct obstetric complications, but it is also protective against certain other physical illnesses, and there are various reasons for this. We know that women who become pregnant and have a child are less likely to smoke, they are less likely to take drugs, they are less likely to drink alcohol, they are less likely to take risks when they are driving or when they are out and about, they're less likely to be the victim of homicide, and they, of course, have increased relationship and monitoring with the healthcare services. And all of this means that actually the death rate from natural causes alone is the same after an abortion and after childbirth, even though childbirth is in many ways technically more complex and in some certain respects riskier from a direct obstetric point of view. Next slide, please. We know that one of the other ways that abortion is harmful to women is because of its association with preterm birth. And this is pretty universally accepted, that there is an association between abortion and preterm birth. If a woman has one abortion, she has about a 30% increased risk of preterm birth in future pregnancies. If she has multiple abortions, that risk continues to accumulate. And the likely mechanism for this is to do with the cervical trauma. For medical abortion, it's a little bit different, but certainly for surgical abortion, it's likely trauma on the cervix, which is making it incompetent and risking preterm birth. Now, what this means is that it has been studied, the effect of this on a population level. They have found that in the USA, abortion is therefore likely responsible for around 20,000 very early preterm births in the USA each year. This is not just preterm birth, this is very early preterm birth. 20,000 additional cases a year. It's responsible for 2,000 extra cases of cerebral palsy each year as a result. And even when you just look at initial neonatal costs of preterm care, it costs around $1 billion or over $1 billion every year just for the initial neonatal care, even without looking at later costs for children having disabilities as a result. Preterm birth is in fact the leading cause of death for children under the age of 5 around the world, being responsible for around 1 million deaths of children a year around the world. And so abortion is a significant contributor to that. Next slide, please. And next slide again. Actually, could we go back one? Sorry. I just want to say very briefly that one of the ways in which abortion and its promotion has been particularly harmful is not because of the direct harms of abortion, but because it distracts from genuine good quality healthcare for women. So we know that the leading problem with maternal mortality in a global context is the lack of emergency obstetric care, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. The lack of access to basic emergency obstetric care is probably the critical factor which needs development in order to reduce the maternal mortality rate. But actually, the United Kingdom government focused in all of its international aid on abortion and family planning. And the government's aid watchdog, which scrutinizes government spending and is generally pro-choice and pro-abortion, it actually said that when you look at the government spending around the world on maternal mortality, they were being ineffective because all of it was going towards family planning and abortion rather than emergency obstetric care. And as a result, women were losing their lives because they did not have emergency care available. And so the focus on family planning has directly led to the death of women around the world in a global context because the money is being diverted from genuine maternal health care into abortion and advocacy and lobbying and so on. Next slide, please. And so the final way that I want to talk about abortion being harmful for women is through impacts on the society more generally. This is a bit more complex, so please do bear with me. What has been shown very decisively and conclusively in the empirical literature is that abortion doesn't just affect the unborn child, and it doesn't just affect the mother. It actually has enormous impacts on society more generally. And the reason is this, that when you legalize abortion, you tell people that they can have free sex with anyone they want, and they can be rid of the consequences if they desire. Even if they use contraception, they will get pregnant quite often. And once they get pregnant, they can have an abortion and they can have no consequences from their actions. And so what we see is that there is a massive increase in sexual behavior. We see that there is much less responsibility from men in particular. So a man will have sex with a woman and he will say to her, I don't have to look after this child. It is your body and your choice and your responsibility and your burden. And so what they saw is in the US, there was a massive increase in single motherhood after abortion was legalized. Now, abortion was supposed to be the solution to single motherhood, because if a single mother got pregnant, she could have an abortion. But what happened was the opposite, that when abortion was legalized, single motherhood increased because women became pregnant much more often. The man decided that because it was her choice, he could abandon her, and he left. And therefore, there was a huge increase in single mothers. And of course, while a man can walk away from this situation with no responsibility and no consequences, because of biology, the woman can never walk away from the consequences. she will always have to deal with an unwanted pregnancy, a child, or an abortion by herself, all of which can be difficult and burdensome. And so what they found was that there was a massive breakdown in the family and a massive increase in single motherhood. And this disproportionately impacted women and children, not men. Next slide, please. It was summarized by the Nobel Prize-winning economist George Akerlof, saying that over the last 25 years, and this was since Roe v. Wade, since abortion was legalized in the US, disturbing trends have occurred. In 1970, the permanent cure to poverty seemed to be on the horizon. But just at that time, single motherhood and the feminization of poverty, meaning that women began to go into poverty, began their long and steady rise. And as a result, United States poverty rates have been stubbornly constant for a quarter of a century. So poverty was being eliminated in the United States until abortion was legalized. And because abortion was legalized, and because of the family breakdown that resulted from that, poverty rates actually stayed the same. And among certain demographics, poverty rates massively increased. And so it's caused much greater inequality than there was prior to legalization. Next slide. We know that, of course, family breakdown has a huge number of consequences. We know that family breakdown is associated with many, many negative outcomes for both parents and for the children, including an increased risk of violence and being involved in crime. We know that it is involved in suicide rates and mental health. We know that the decline in marriage is associated with child poverty and inequality. We know that when men do not have the responsibility of children and of families to look after, they are more likely to be involved in crime, including violent crime. And we know that when sexual behavior is changed by the legalization of abortion, there is a massive increase of sexually transmitted diseases. So, for example, it has been shown that when you legalize abortion in about 30 different countries that have been studied, in every single case, sexually transmitted diseases have increased as a result of legalized abortion. Not because abortion directly causes sexually transmitted diseases, but because abortion's legalization changes the behavior of the society, and then that leads to the increase in sexually transmitted diseases. And this has been widely seen. And of course, in some cases, leads to very serious sexually transmitted diseases such as HIV, or in some cases, HPV causing cervical cancer, and so on. Next slide, please. It goes without saying that most of these have a disproportionate negative impact on women specifically, because they are the ones who deal with the consequences of an unwanted pregnancy. Next slide again, please. And next slide again. So then, in terms of abortion in reality, this is an overview of how legal abortion works in practice. We have around 200,000 legal abortions every year in the UK, which means 1 in 3 women in their lifetime. We know that 98% of these abortions are done for mental health reasons, which in the UK means any reason at all, including sex-selective abortion. So almost all abortions are done for social reasons or economic reasons or career reasons or kind of abortion on demand. By contrast, only 2% of abortions, or 1.5%, are done because the child has a disability, and in the UK, that is illegal up to birth. So if a child has any disability, such as Down syndrome or even cleft lip, they can be aborted at any moment up until the moment of birth in the UK and in many other Western countries. We know that around 3,000 abortions in the UK occur after 20 weeks, and viability is now around 21 weeks. So around 3,000 abortions happen in the UK around the point of viability, where many of these babies could survive if they were just given another week, or many of them are already viable. And by contrast, the extreme case where abortion is necessary to save the life of a woman because she has an emergency medical situation, at most 99 abortions out of 200,000 are for this reason. And when you look at the statistics, many of these abortions are not medically necessary. Some of them are for mental health reasons. Some of them, I saw one of the statistics through a Freedom of Information request that said a life-saving abortion was performed because the woman had a high blood cholesterol. and so on. So the number of genuinely life-saving abortions is extremely small as a proportion of abortion in Western countries. Next slide, please. We see many abuses of the abortion law in the UK. As I said, we've seen sex-selective abortion. We see the pre-signing of abortion forms. So abortion clinics have been found pre-signing the forms without ever seeing a woman, without checking that she is legally permitted to have an abortion. They sign the form and allow her to have an abortion, which is criminally prosecutable. In the UK, partial birth abortion is legal, where the child is delivered almost in entirety. And forgive me for saying this, forgive me for describing it in detail, but in a partial birth abortion, the baby is delivered through the vaginal canal, except for the head. And at that point, the doctor puts forceps into the skull of the child and removes its brain. And this was usually done on a late-term baby, usually in the 2nd or 3rd trimester. So it was a particularly gruesome method of killing usually viable children. And this is legal in the UK as it stands. We've seen that sometimes the baby has survived the abortion and has been delivered living. And in that case, often the baby is simply left to die. They are not given medical care, and it's effectively a form of infanticide. In the Netherlands, infanticide is actually legal. So if the baby is disabled, it is legal to refuse to give it medical care in the Netherlands, and you can just leave it to die if it has a disability. We know that in the UK, there have been abortions up to birth for any disability. We can have abortions for cleft palate or cleft lip. We know that the remains of the children that have been aborted have been sent to hospitals, not to be buried or cremated or respectfully disposed of, but actually they were burnt to be used as fuel to heat the hospital, and so on. And as I said earlier, there have been coerced abortions by doctors on disabled women. Next slide, please. So then finally, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about this from the child's perspective. As I've suggested, this is not a battle between the mother and the child. There have actually been many consequences of legalized abortion that have been harmful to women and harmful to society. But of course, the child has to be discussed and has to be understood. And so what are the first principles here? Well, a good starting principle is the international law. This is binding international law that almost every country in the world has signed, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. In Article 6, it says that every human being has the inherent right to life. And not only that it has the right to life, but that this right shall be protected by law. So it's not enough just to say that you are pro-life or that you have a right to life. The right to life must be protected legally. And so really what this shows is that the central question of the ethics of abortion is the fetus or the embryo a human being? Because if it is a human being, then we have international agreement that it has the inherent right to life and needs legal protection. Next slide. Next slide again, please. Now, what do we mean when we say a human being? Or what do we mean when we say, when does life begin? There are many things that are alive that are not protected by law. Bacteria are alive, skin cells are often alive, and they are not given special legal protection. So what is a human being? Well, a human being is something like you and me. It is an individual organism, a member of the human species, a member of Homo sapiens. That is what we mean when we say a human being, a living individual human organism. And this, of course, is a biological question. This was not kind of discovered by religious people. This was not discovered by philosophers. This was not a dogma. It was not someone's personal opinion. This is fundamentally a scientific biological question. Next slide, please. Now, there was someone who wanted to kind of prove this several years ago. So he was an American researcher at the University of Chicago, and he asked the general public, is the beginning of life a biological question, a legal question, philosophical, religious, and so on? And he found that 80% of the public said this is a biological question, a scientific question, because of course biology means the study of life. Life beginning is a biological question. So he then said, okay, let's ask biologists. And so he surveyed 5,000 to 6,000 biologists around the world. Next slide. And what he found was that when he asked these 5,000 biologists, when does a human organism begin to exist, 95% of them said at fertilization. So this is not a religious dogma or a personal opinion or a philosophical view. There is an overwhelming biological consensus that life begins at fertilization. Next slide, please. He even asked them, what is your view on abortion, to make sure that he wasn't just asking pro-life biologists. So he asked the pro-choice biologists, when does a human organism begin to exist? And even the very pro-choice biologists on the left, this is very pro-choice, even about 70% of very pro-choice biologists agreed that life begins at fertilization. So there is a broad consensus across partisan politics and ideology that life does begin at fertilization. Next slide, please. And so what this means is that this is a scientific question that a human being begins to exist at fertilization, and international law says that every human being has the right to life, and therefore it logically follows that the unborn child from fertilization should have the same legal protection that everyone else has. And of course, this is enshrined in medical history until very, very recent times. In the Hippocratic Oath, as most of you are probably familiar, it says that I will not give a woman a pessary to produce an abortion. As recently as 1949, in the wake of World War II, when human rights were being developed formally and very much on the agenda, the World Medical Association came up with their statement on medical ethics, and they said, I will maintain the utmost respect for human life from the time of conception. And this was not a Christian document, it was not a Muslim document, it was not a secular document, it was doctors around the world all agreeing, no matter their religious view or their philosophical view, they all agreed on a scientific basis that life begins at conception. Next slide, please. And so likewise in the International Code of Medical Ethics at the World Medical Association, they said, a doctor must always bear in mind the obligation of preserving human life from conception. In my own country, which as you know is now very pro-choice or pro-abortion, in 1947, they had the same view. They said, although there have been many changes in medicine over 2,000 years, the spirit of the Hippocratic Oath cannot change and can be reaffirmed by the profession. It enjoins or requires the duty of curing, the greatest crime being the cooperation in the destruction of life by murder, suicide, and abortion. And in fact, in the UK and in the US, abortion was only criminalized in statutory law in the 19th century. Before that, it was criminalized in the common law under precedent, originally from church precedent and then from the beginning legal system. Abortion was only explicitly banned from conception in the 19th century in the UK and America. And the reason for this was because doctors had discovered fertilization as the beginning of human life. And so doctors promoted the banning of abortion because they said that a human life already exists from conception. And as a matter of medical and scientific fact, these unborn children have to be included within the scope of legal protection and the right to life. Next slide, please. So just a few facts, I'll go through these very quickly about fetal development because most of you will be familiar with most of them. The heart begins to beat in a very primitive form around 3 weeks after conception, but there is some evidence from the University of Oxford a few years ago that the heart may begin to beat as early as 16 days after conception, which means that by the end of just the 4th week after conception, there are 1 million heartbeats. Next slide, please. The first noticeable movements in the embryo, when it's still called an embryo, are around week 4 to 5 after conception. By 6 weeks, the embryo shows a startle response. And also by 6 weeks, you can even record EEG activity from the child, not in vivo, but this experiment was done in the 1950s, where women had miscarried children at 6 weeks after fertilization. And in the miscarried children, they were able to use tiny, tiny electrodes to measure brain activity in the baby. And they found this as early as 6 weeks and potentially even earlier, but they weren't able to actually have children earlier than 6 weeks. By 7 weeks, the baby has taste buds and can hiccup and suck and swallow. By 8 weeks, the baby practices breathing, although of course it's breathing amniotic fluid rather than air. By 8 weeks, 90% of the structures in the body are present. And also by 8 weeks, the brain is nearly half of the baby's body weight. So one of the reasons embryos look particularly strange to us and not necessarily like a child or an adult human being is because their head is so big. But the reason their head is so big is because their brain develops probably more quickly than any other organ, and of course is active even at this early stage. Next slide, please. It's possible, we think, that the baby can feel pain from as early as 10 weeks after conception, and some people think even earlier. And this is a big debate, which I won't go into, but there was a recent study showing this, which was by one of the leading pro-choice researchers on fetal pain. And of course, that means that the baby is probably conscious from 10 weeks or earlier. Next slide, please. And next slide again. One of the most remarkable studies was done using twins. So what they have found is that when a baby is in the womb, they will be more careful when they're moving their arms around if their arms are near their face. So they will wave their arms around generally very quickly, but when they come to their eyes, they will slow down in order to protect their eyes. Now, what they have discovered with twins, where they are particularly close together and able to touch each other, is that twins will move their arms around quickly in general, but they will move their arms slowly when they go towards their twin's head or their body, suggesting that there is a very sort of primitive kind of consciousness that they need to withdraw from hurting their twin sibling. And this is there as early as 12 weeks. At 14 weeks, they can hear, and when music is played to them or when they are spoken to, they can begin to move their mouths and tongues in response. At 15 to 16 weeks, they are able to taste things in the womb, and later they can even learn those tastes in the womb and prefer those tastes after birth. Next slide, please. Later on in the pregnancy, generally in the 3rd trimester, they can learn melodies, so they can actually detect wrong notes. So they will learn a song in the womb, and if the song is played to them with a wrong note after birth, the baby will notice that and will stare as a result. So they can even remember songs in the womb. They can recognize their mother's voice as distinct from a stranger's voice, and they can recognize their own language or accent. In fact, there was a study with French and German newborn babies, and it found that as soon as they were born, French babies and German babies had different ways of crying that matched the accents of the languages they heard in the womb. They can cry in the womb by 23 weeks and so on. And there's even some evidence that they have a very, very basic visual awareness, obviously only in a very, very crude way. Next slide, please. Next slide again, please. Actually, sorry, can we go back and stay on that? I just want to highlight this quickly. Again, many of you will be familiar with this, but it is often or sometimes claimed that the child is a parasite that only takes from the mother and doesn't give back to the mother. Whereas in fact, we now know that the baby can send stem cells to the mother throughout pregnancy that can heal her tissues. So we know that after a heart attack, a myocardial infarction, the baby's stem cells can repair the mother's heart. Sometimes they repair skin wounds, sometimes they repair the liver, and so on. There was even a case where a woman had an abortion, and the stem cells that were left over by her baby actually went to her liver and repaired it after an episode of hepatitis. So this is really quite remarkable, the interaction between mother and child that benefits both of them. Now, as with any biological process, this can go wrong, and so this has been implicated in autoimmune disease as well. But the general principle is that the baby is there providing genuine physiological support to the mother, as well as taking resources from her as her child. And there's evidence that this protects against Alzheimer's disease, against breast cancer, and so on. It's thought that these stem cells actually act as surveillance modules, protecting against potentially cancerous breast cells and preventing them from becoming cancerous. Next slide, please. So then just to show in an illustrative way, and I promise I'm very much coming to the end now. This is a baby at 9 weeks from my medical school textbook. Again, you will all be aware of this. I don't need to show you this, but next slide. At 11 weeks, it's a bit more developed, 11 weeks after conception. Next slide. This is at 18 weeks, and next slide again. And this is a baby at about 20 weeks. And can you click so the video plays, please? So this is MRI imaging of the child. You can see that it's very much active, just halfway through the pregnancy. In the UK, just as an illustration, it is legal to abort a child at this stage for any reason at all. If you find out that this child is a baby girl and you want to have an abortion, you just say this would affect my mental health, and you can obtain an abortion on those grounds. Next slide, please. And finally, if you're particularly sensitive, please do look away. I don't want to force you to watch this, but this is a baby having an anesthetic injection before fetal surgery at just 23 weeks. So again, in the UK, abortion is legal for any reason at this point, but you can see that the baby is having an anesthetic injection before surgery and clearly is able to feel pain as a result. It should come in just a moment. No? This one is a lot clearer anyway, so this is around 30 weeks. Are you able to skip ahead maybe 10 seconds? No? Let me try one more time, and if it doesn't work, we'll skip it. Now, this is important because some people on the sort of pro-abortion, is it playing or? Yeah, yeah. So here's the injection. So you can see that the child cries very clearly in response to the anesthetic injection. And this is important because many people on the pro-abortion side within the medical field say that the child is completely unconscious for the whole of pregnancy. It only becomes conscious when it is born. And evidence like this, I think, clearly contradicts that view, and I think is fairly plain for everyone to see. Next slide, please. And so finally, I just want to come to a few very quick questions that come up. I'm not going to go in detail, as I could spend hours talking about this, but just to preempt some questions. The first, what about when the mother's life is at risk? This, of course, is legal in every country in the world. If a mother's life is genuinely threatened by chorioamnionitis or preeclampsia or similar conditions, it is legal to have an abortion no matter how pro-life the country. And pro-lifers agree that this is permissible. That in order to save the mother's life, you are able to protect the mother by delivering the child. You are not intentionally ending the life of the child, and you are not deliberately ending the life of the child. But if there is another life at stake, it is legally permissible to save the mother's life by removing the child and tragically foreseeing that it will pass away as a result. The second question, do pro-life laws work? It's sometimes claimed that pro-life laws don't actually work because women have abortions anyway. Now, it is true that even when abortion is illegal, abortions do happen. In Indonesia, there will be illegal abortions, but the evidence shows very clearly that the rate is much, much lower. One of the best pieces of evidence for this is the study I mentioned earlier, where women were denied abortions because they were over a gestational limit. Those women who were denied an abortion after they wanted an abortion, 70% of them ended up having the child, and only 30% of them went to another state or had an illegal abortion or had a miscarriage. So the large majority of women who are denied an abortion end up keeping the baby. So pro-life laws do work and they do save lives. And women are glad for them eventually, once the child has been born and so on. Are women more pro-choice? Actually, in many studies in many countries, women are more pro-life than men. And so I sometimes get told that I should not speak about this topic as a man and that it should be women speaking. But the reality is that if women do speak on this topic, in the UK and in the US and in many countries, women are actually even more pro-life than men. And this is often not very widely known. And then finally, the question of illegal, unsafe abortions. I can say more about this in a Q&A because it's a huge topic, but this has been my research topic for the last 3 years. And the short answer is that although some women do have unsafe abortions when abortion is illegal, the reality is that they continue to do so even when abortion is legal. So I have studied this phenomenon in England, in the Netherlands, in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Middle East, like Tunisia, which has legalized abortion, in Latin America, in India, in Bangladesh. In all of these places, when abortion has been legalized, the number of women dying has not fallen. In some cases, when abortion has been legalized, because so many more women get abortions, the number of women who die from unsafe abortion has actually increased as a result of legalization. And so what we find is that when a country has a very good healthcare system and pro-life laws, no women die from having unsafe abortions because emergency care is available and most abortion is safe, even when illegal these days. So Malta and Poland have pro-life laws, but they have almost no maternal deaths. They have the lowest maternal death rate in the entire world. Malta, for example, has no abortion for any reason and has had no maternal deaths from any cause in the last 10 years. Whereas by contrast, in countries that have legal abortion, but have less widespread access to emergency care, they still have many women dying from illegal abortion because women still cannot get safe abortions and they cannot get emergency follow-up for complications. So places like India, Bangladesh, South Africa, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Mozambique, all of these countries still have many deaths from illegal abortion, even though they have legalized abortion. So legalizing abortion has not been shown to be the answer in these countries. So I thank you so much for your patience. I know there has been a huge amount of material, and I'm sorry if it was slightly too much, but I'm very grateful for your patience, and I'm very grateful for you considering this profoundly important topic. I would be delighted to answer any questions, and let me just say two quick things on the next slide, please. The first is that there is much more to say about this topic. So if you have any questions about the evidence used here, about the references, about the ethics, about the empirical literature, all of that is available at my website. Any question you can have about abortion, or almost any question, will be answered on this website with the most up-to-date, balanced, neutral academic research. And then finally, my organization that I work for, Canopy Global Foundation, we are an organization dedicated to protecting women and children in a truly pro-life way from human trafficking, from domestic violence, and from abortion. And so if you're interested in the work that we do, we'd love to hear from you and to speak to you about this, about how we can provide not only expert speaking, but also practical suggestions and policy suggestions for how to protect women and children in a way which values the dignity of them both. Thank you so much for your patience and for your interest in this topic. It's an immense honor and privilege for me to speak here today, and I'm very grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Miller, for a very enlightening presentation. Now we will have 45 minutes question and answer, after which the session will be ended by a conclusion. So this really a very compelling presentation that we see. There are a wake-up call that there are more blue countries which is legalized the abortion in contrast with the red or yellow countries. And also I was very surprised to see that there is no significant result from abortion to mental benefits. In contrast, that there are increase of suicidal, alcohol and drug abuse, and also PTSD. And also the suicidal rate for women who undergone abortion is higher than the baseline of suicidal risk in women. So I'd like to invite the questions here from and discuss the topics from the participants who attend in our Senate Academic Facultas room, please. Yes, please name your, please mention your name and institution. Thank you.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Miller. It's very comprehensive lecture. My name is Dr. Taufik. I would like to ask you, unfortunately in Indonesia, abortion is very sad condition now because the maternal mortality rate is very high, cause the abortion, especially illegal unsafe abortion. Yeah, maybe this our challenge to improve the condition, will be better. I just wondering about your slide about the high rate the patient do the suicide after abortion. Can you explain about this condition? Yes.
About suicide after abortion, you mean?
Suicide after abortion.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that question and thank you for coming. So the mechanism of this is a bit controversial, but we know that if a woman becomes pregnant and she has the child, her suicide risk will significantly drop. So we know that pregnancy and child raising are very protective factors against suicide. Because if a woman has a child, she feels that she has something to live for. She feels like she has reason to live. And even if she doesn't want to live, she feels that her children may need a mother to look after them, or they might need her to be around. And so in the UK, we have a different medical system, I think, to you, where we do rotations in different specialties as a doctor. So I did do 4 months of psychiatry as a doctor, as a kind of junior doctor in psychiatry. And I would come across women who said, and in fact in general practice as well, who say, I don't want to live, I don't find any joy in anything, I have all these symptoms of depression or other reasons for suicidality like borderline personality disorder, etc. And they would say, but I can't commit suicide because my family or my children need me. They need me to be around for them, and so I'm sticking around for them. And that's actually a common phenomenon, at least from my experience and from the data, is that pregnancy and child raising are very strongly protective against suicide. And so abortion firstly removes that protection. It leaves the woman without a child so that she doesn't have the kind of reason to live or the dependent person to care for. But it also adds a significant trauma. And we know that the majority of women, even in Western countries where abortion is less stigmatized and where abortion is available on demand, even in Western countries, David Ferguson's research showed that the majority of women feel things like guilt and sorrow and regret after abortion. They still think it was the right decision. So they were the typical, and obviously this is typical, not universal, but the typical response after an abortion is, it was the right decision and I think I did the right thing, but it still grieves me, I still feel sad, I still have a sense of regret about it, and I still feel guilty about it. And so all of those things, of course, can add to the psychopathology of suicide, which is often about trauma, often about regret, about guilt, about sadness, and so on. So abortion both removes the protection of children, and it also adds a traumatic, distressing event, which can facilitate suicidal thoughts. And that's partly, those are kind of the two main reasons that it causes a higher suicide rate. And actually the other thing, of course, if a woman has a child, she's less likely to drink alcohol and to smoke and to do drugs. And we know that depending on the substance, those can cause depression and suicidality as well, like alcohol. Women who have children are less likely to drink alcohol, and therefore they're less likely to have the depressive effects of alcohol as well. So there are a few mechanisms, but the overall association is quite clear. I hope that helps to answer.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have a questions from Professor Budi Wiweko, who joined us from the Zoom. So I will read it. Thank you very much for your very interesting and comprehensive lecture. As you explained that life begins since fertilization, it's become interesting for us in the field of in vitro fertilization program services. So since in the case of excess of embryo, some patients who refuse to freeze embryos, we should dispose the live embryos. How's this problem based on ethical point of view? Does it include the category of abortion? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that important question as well.
Professor Budi Wiweko is the professor in obstetrician and gynecology department.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you to the professor for tuning in. And I'm sorry I can't look you in the eye, but it's a wonderful to have you listening. on this topic, there are obviously very different views, and of course, it doesn't count as abortion in the kind of legal sense. It's not the same thing as abortion. But there is a genuine question about how do we protect human life from its very beginning, even where that might seem unintuitive. So, the pictures I showed at the end where a baby is maybe 9 weeks, it's easy to see that this is a baby and easy for people to sympathize with it. Whereas it can be more difficult to intuitively sympathize with a small embryo which can't feel anything, can't sense anything, and which is very small and doesn't look like a kind of formed human being. I think what I'd say on that question is, often our kind of senses and intuitions are misleading, and we have to think about the kind of rational perspective behind what is it that makes humans valuable. Are we valuable because of our cognitive abilities, because we are intellectual? Are we valuable because we are in the right shape, or because we are old, or because we are developed? Or are we valuable equally because we are all equally human beings? And therefore, the pro-life perspective does ultimately say that we are valuable because we are human beings. It's not because of any ability we have, because all of our abilities differ. Some people are more intelligent than others. The professors here are more intelligent than me, but they are not more valuable. We are all equally valuable despite our different abilities. And so when we think about it, aside from emotions and aside from intuitions, we have to either say whether we have a fundamental commitment to human equality and the value of human life, or whether we think that some humans can be discarded or destroyed because they don't meet our criteria for having value. Now, when it comes to the question of in vitro fertilization, I think what I'd say is that it is possible to do this, and I know it has more complications, but it is possible to do this in a way which doesn't discard or destroy embryos or any other human life. So I have friends, and again, I'm not an expert in this field, so please do forgive me, and I defer to your expertise. But it is possible, and I have friends who have done in vitro fertilization and have committed to protecting and nurturing all of the embryos that they create. So a friend of mine, for example, and his wife formed 3 embryos through in vitro fertilization, and they committed in advance that because of our value and respect for human life, we will implant all of these embryos, even if they have a very serious disability. And one of them did. One of them had triploidy, so they had an extra set of chromosomes. And of course, this child was miscarried and wasn't possible to be delivered, and they went through that. But that was their commitment to their understanding of the value of human life. So what I'd say is, of course, this is a difficult question. And of course, thinking through bioethics in a way that is really committed to the results of our thinking can throw up things which are either counterintuitive or might challenge us in certain ways. But I suppose, whatever your view on that, I would say abortion is a separate topic, and we can think about the societal costs and the human costs of abortion separately from IVF. But also, I would say that this is a difficult field and sometimes can challenge us to live in different ways. And if that is the case in this particular situation, then I'm very grateful for your open-mindedness and willingness to explore these questions, even when it might affect practice. And so it is a challenging area, but I hope that the pro-life perspective has been a bit clearer and can shed some light on these other issues as well. And yeah, I hope that makes a bit of sense.
So as from your explanation, so every embryos resulted from in vitro fertilization programs is all we also need to respect it, because the embryos becomes a living substances like that. Yeah, is it correct?
Yeah. So I think what the pro-life view is often kind of misunderstood as being about a potential human being. Whereas the scientific reality is that this is a human being, this is a human organism, and human organisms at different stages look very different and can do very different things. When I was a baby, I was a little bit smaller. I'm still small, but I was even smaller as a baby. I wasn't able to talk, I wasn't able to do philosophy, I wasn't able to do any sort of meaningful relationship with people, but I was still valuable, even though I didn't look like an adult, even though I couldn't act like an adult, even though I couldn't think much about important things. And so the value of a human being is dependent on the fact that it is a human being, even if it can't do all the things adults can. And so I think we should have, to be consistent, we have to have the same principle. Now, some people are very practically minded, some people are very principally minded, and ultimately we have to explore this with our own conscience. But I think when you think through this issue in a way which is trying to be consistent and which tries to look at why humans are valuable, the best explanation of our value is that we are human beings and we are equal, and therefore we have to be protected even when it's inconvenient or even when it's unintuitive.
Very great answer from, and I think this explained the Professor Budi Wiweko question. So before I goes back to the Zoom, and I invite whether there is a question from the participants who attend in this room. Okay, please go ahead. Please mention your name and institution.
Thank you, Dr. Ade. Good evening, good morning, Mr. Calum Miller. My name is Buto Kevianti. I'm resident from Department of Forensic and Medicolegal. I'm very grateful to hear your enlightening about your lecture about this topic of abortion. I agree about your lecture today because abortion is caused by the social failure. What society bring women have to choose, they thought to get the abortion. This decision must known and must respect about their decision. So we must, as a physician, should give the time for here and for knowing what the reason of the women when they deciding to get to the abortion. I do agree that it's not about the pro-life and pro-choice. It's not the legalization, but it's about how to grow in our health, and health providers cares to give the insurance for the women to get their insurance in their rights to choose what they want to do in reproduction as well as an abortion. As a physician, I will stand with my principle as a Hippocratic oath that we should respect the life of the children, although there is still child from the fertilization. But as you know, in our country, about the legalization is not there is what I say, the legalization of abortion is not here in Indonesia, and the healthcare providers also still growing. I cannot say that bad, but still growing. And we must learn from this lecture, actually, to give our more perspective about what caused that abortion itself. We know from the sexualization and then culture of corporate, and then after that sexual culture. This enlightenment lecture for me. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for your very kind words and for sharing your thoughts there. I think maybe a helpful way to look at it is with a medical analogy, that abortion is kind of masking the problems. So I work in general surgery and generally work emergency on call, so it's mostly appendicitis. And one of the things we don't want to do sometimes is we often don't treat with antibiotics immediately, because we want to know how is the clinical situation evolving and what is really the root cause. So we don't want to use antibiotics to mask the appendicitis. We want to see what is the root cause. We also don't want to refuse to treat the appendicitis. We don't just give paracetamol and morphine and say, look, you don't have any pain anymore, the problem is gone away. We want to know what is the root problem that is causing this and how can we solve that? Because that is the only way to fully uphold the dignity and the value of the person, of the patient. And so I would say the same thing is true with abortion, that abortion is at best symptom relief. It is at the very best a way of masking the true problems and trying to give an easy solution which only creates further problems down the line for the woman, for the child, and for society generally. And so I think it is absolutely essential, as you say, to understand the reasons why people seek abortion in the first place. And some of these are very serious reasons that are very understandable. So, you know, I've spoken to women as someone who is pro-life and who opposes abortion morally because it takes the life of a child. But I have spoken with women who are seeking abortion, and I understand why they want an abortion. And I don't think they're doing it because they have no respect for life. I don't think it's because they're monsters. I don't think it's, you know, necessarily because they are asserting their choice as a liberated person. For some people, it is really an extremely difficult situation that they cannot see any other way out of. But as people in the rest of society and people in positions of power, either through medicine or politics or academics, we are the people who can try our best to actually provide solutions and who can ask, what is the core problem? Is it the economic difficulty? Is it the abuse from a partner or something else? And how can we address that so that we not only protect the child, but that we also give the woman the solution to her problem and help her to live a life that respects her dignity and her infinite value as well. And I think for me, that is what being pro-life means, is that you value both and you look at the root causes and try to address those in particular. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Miller. So there are a question from Zoom. I will invite Dr. Peter and Professor Andon from the obstetrician, and I think Dr. Peter is the head of the chair of Obstetrician and Gynecologist Association. Please, I invite them to open mic. Okay, so this is Dr. Peter Johannes Manopo. Please state your question.
Thank you, Dr. Pukovica, moderator. Good morning, Dr. Miller. I am Peter John Manopo. I'm a general surgeon and bioethicist from the Indonesian Bioethics Forum. In case of medical abortion, to what extent could the ethical deliberation overweight the clinical indication? Because usually the clinician argues that the medical abortion is indicated to save the mother's life. But on the other hand, we know that the embryo or fetus is the potential human being with human life and human dignity. I would like to know your perspective about this dilemma. Thank you.
Thank you. So to clarify, is this a question about therapeutic abortion, about when it's permissible? And yeah, okay, great. Yeah. Thank you for that question. So this is probably a difference in terminology, but just to clarify, I guess across cultures. So we would generally call abortion in that situation therapeutic abortion, whereas medical abortion is now often used to refer to abortion using pharmacological methods. So you can do a surgical abortion or a medical abortion. And so when I say medical abortion, I would mean with pills, mifepristone and misoprostol, or sometimes other pills, methotrexate. So in terms of the therapeutic abortion, it's absolutely right that we don't suddenly say the child is not a human being anymore. We're not saying that in that situation, the child loses their value or their dignity. But what we say is that it's a difficult situation where we have to try our best to preserve as many lives as possible. And sometimes the only way to preserve a life is by delivering the child and preserving the mother's life. And usually what happens is that either you can save either you can save the mother and the child will pass away, or you cannot save either. So as an example, suppose you have a situation where chorioamnionitis develops at 17 weeks. So the mother is septic, she is going to pass away within hours to days, maybe days at best with intensive care. She's completely septic, she's going to die, and if she dies at 17 or 18 weeks, the child will also die because the mother is sustaining the child and the child is not viable at only 17 weeks. So whatever you do in that situation, the child will pass away and there is no way to save the child. And so the best thing that you can do is try to save one of them. And so in this case, what you can do is deliver the child so that the source of the sepsis is removed from the mother to try and save at least one of the lives, knowing that the alternative was both of them would die. Now, when we do this, we're not intentionally ending the life of the child. We're not doing it because we want the child to be dead. We're not doing it because, of a trivial reason, like the child should pass away because of a career reason or because it's the wrong gender. We're only doing it for the most serious reason, which is because another life is at stake. In the same way that, in general, we cannot end anyone else's life, but if our life is at stake, maybe someone is threatening us with a gun, we are allowed to do something which ends another life in a sort of self-defense. And so we're not intending to end the life of the child, and we certainly grieve the loss of that child's life. But as long as we don't intend to end the child's life, as long as we don't directly kill the child, and as long as it's done for a proportionate reason, i.e. saving another person's life, it would generally be seen as permissible to do that, to remove the child in a way which respected its dignity as much as possible. So you wouldn't dismember it, for example, you would deliver the child and give it a burial and try your best to respect it in order to save the mother's life. Now, there are other cases where it's more complex. There are other cases where it's even simpler. If the baby is viable, if it's a life-threatening condition at 26 weeks, the baby potentially is viable, and you can deliver the baby either vaginally or by C-section and try and keep the baby alive. And that way you can save both lives by delivering the child earlier. But the principle is always trying to save the most lives as possible and not widening the scope of therapeutic abortion so that it means abortion on demand. So as I said, in the UK, we only allow abortion if the child has a disability or for health reasons. But because health is interpreted so broadly, it means abortion on demand. And so it's important when we craft laws around saving the life of the mother that they are explicitly for the purpose of preserving her life from a clearly life-threatening physical condition, rather than a generic thing about mental health, which can be easily abused and exploited in law. So as I say, there are more complicated situations and other clinical scenarios, which I don't have time to explain in detail, but those would be the general principles, and I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Dr. Miller.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. So in that point of view, so can we say that the pregnancy becomes when pregnancy in some condition harmful or risking the mother's life, so we can view it as a disease, and then termination of their pregnancy become the treatment, just like that. And also, and in our regulation Health Act, we see that the part of the medical indication for termination in pregnancy is also if the doctor finds any gene anomalies or congenital anomalies. So what do you say about that?
Yeah, so this is another very important question, and I think it's worth keeping in mind in this discussion about the proportion of abortions for each reason. So as I said, in the UK, we have 200,000, a fifth of a million abortions a year, and 98% of those are for mental health reasons. whereas less than 100 are because there is a genuine physical threat to the mother, and about 3,000 are because the child has a disability. So again, a small percentage. So there's kind of two kinds of situation. One is where the child has a disability which is not life-threatening, like Down syndrome or cleft palate, something like that. And in this case, I think the evidence is clear that if we really believe in the dignity of human life and we believe that all humans are equal, we have to say that humans with disabilities are equal and have dignity and deserve to have their lives protected as well. And when you look at the studies, you know, some people say, well, if a child has Down syndrome, their life will be horrible and they will have lots of suffering and it's better that they're not alive. Whereas there have been studies on the lives of people with Down syndrome that show that almost all of them are glad that they are alive. They actually have higher life satisfaction than able-bodied people. And likewise, the families are glad that they had the child with Down syndrome and so on. Now, it gets a bit more complex where the condition is a life-limiting anomaly, like anencephaly or maybe Fetal syndrome, trisomy 13, or certain other genetic conditions. What I would say on this is, again, that we can see, I think, the right answer by listening to people who have been in that situation and have kept the child. So many people intuitively think, how can a child with, you know, trisomy 13, Fetal syndrome, or anencephaly have any meaningful life? How can it be possible for them to have a meaningful life that has dignity? But when you actually interview women who have kept the baby in that situation, they said that this was so profoundly meaningful, that their child had dignity and that their child's life was genuinely valuable and worth it. So there was a study of women who had children with conditions where they passed away within a day or a few days of birth. So they went through all of pregnancy just to have a child for a few days or a few hours. And overwhelmingly, 98.5% of them said, I would do it the same thing again. I have no regrets. It was the right thing to do, because those few hours were some of the most meaningful few hours of my entire life. My child never got to grow up. They never got to be an actor. They never got to be a doctor. They never got to speak, but they were a human being and I loved them, and their life was so valuable that I would go through all of that again. And that's what 98.5% say. Whereas by contrast, for women who have abortions in those situations, they often describe it as torture. They say that I went through all, because by this point, they're still usually 20 weeks along or so. They say, I went through 20 weeks of pregnancy just to give birth to a dead child. And it's not that in that situation, an abortion doesn't stop the suffering. You might think the thing to ease the woman's suffering is to end the pregnancy so that at least she doesn't have to go through even more weeks of suffering before the child passes away. But that's not what the evidence shows. What the evidence shows is that if a woman has an abortion, she grieves until the due date anyway. She grieves all the way through the pregnancy until the point it would have ended, and then she carries on grieving afterwards as well. And so there's a sort of intuitive idea that we can at least relieve the suffering by ending the child's life early and making things easier for the woman. But actually the empirical evidence suggests that the opposite is the case, that if they have the child, they're very grateful for the time they spent with the child. And if they have an abortion, they end up grieving and suffering even after the child has been terminated. So yeah, it's an incredibly tragic situation that can come up, and all of us can sympathize with those difficult situations. But the question is, how do we find the best solution and find the most meaning out of a very difficult situation? And when you look at the literature and the women's stories, their own voices say that actually the most meaningful thing was for the child to be given a few hours of life outside the womb.
Thank you very much, Dr. Miller. So I think that's also answering the question from the chat room from our preclinical medical students, the Miss Sydney Chandra, I assume, Miss Sydney Chandra. So I was informed that there is also a question again from the participant from Zoom, Professor Andon. Can we call and unmute Professor Andon.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Ade. Thank you very much, Dr. Miller, for your very inspiring lecture. Actually, my question has been answered by you, and then that is the problem always faced by us in case of non-invasive prenatal testing. Sometimes we found that the results is the possibility for the trisomy 13 fatal syndrome or trisomy 18, also with the Edward syndrome. And also I agree with you with sometimes we found also cases with the anencephaly. It is the problem by us because this probably their living is very short. But I already got information from you that probably the counseling is more important for this. Whether the parents need to prolong the pregnancy, but also it will also have consequences with the prolong for the grieving of the mother. There's also the problem that probably we can face. Yeah. I think the key how to solve this kind of problem, I think, by doing the proper counseling, something like that, in order to tell everything based on the evidence we have. And that my comment and also question for Dr. Miller. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I maybe this doesn't answer, but I just want to say a little bit more on that, which is that there's a big movement in the United Kingdom, which is the disability rights movement, which talks a lot about these issues. And so I have a friend who works in this, who is a Down syndrome advocate. She has a child with Down syndrome, and she's really in all of the medical schools, not as a pro-life person, but just as a disability rights advocate, who says that when you actually hear the stories of families who have had a disabled child, their disabled child, however disabled, whether they have a moderate disability or a mild disability or, a hugely complex disability, their child was valuable and actually often exceeded expectations. So there's some very interesting literature on trisomy 13 and 18, Fetal syndrome and Edward syndrome, where these have traditionally been thought of as fatal conditions, where the child probably won't survive for more than a few hours after birth or a few days. And actually, there have been children surviving very significant lengths of time, many years in some cases, with Edward syndrome, for example. We know that someone, I think it was over 2 years, was the longest surviving person, even with anencephaly. So a baby girl was born with anencephaly. There's a picture of her on the British Medical Journal that shows even for 2 years, she survived with most of her brain missing. And so it's interesting, I think, that as medical technology advances, we become more and more able to give more experience of life to these children. One of the things that was noted in one of the key papers on Edward syndrome is that Down syndrome also used to be seen as a fatal fetal abnormality. It used to be the case that if a child was born with Down syndrome or diagnosed with Down syndrome, the expectation was that they would die within a few days or weeks, and that there was no point trying to preserve their life. And of course, we know now that people with Down syndrome can survive for decades and can have very meaningful lives. They can work in acting, they can work in dancing, they can work in restaurants, they can work in office jobs, they can do all sorts of things that have been opened up to people with Down syndrome because they have been given a chance for what was once considered a fatal condition. Now, I'm not saying that, we will get to the same stage of children with anencephaly working in office jobs or anything like that. I'm not kind of deluded about the abilities of certain people with complex disabilities. But it does, I think, illustrate that often our expectations can be exceeded, and we can often be reluctant to give value to people with disabilities. And if we actually give people a chance, we can see that they can have profoundly meaningful lives that are meaningful for themselves and also meaningful for their families. And we know that, again, families who have children or siblings with disabilities overwhelmingly say that it was a good thing, that they were glad that their child has value, and that the child actually made them better people. And this is a really interesting finding from the Edward syndrome literature, that people who have a child with Edwards syndrome in their family say that having that son or daughter or brother or sister made the whole family better, more well-adjusted people. And so I think often we think of people's value only in terms of what they can do, but actually people, even if they cannot do much, can have a profound effect on us and on society. And I think that's especially so if we give life a chance and we protect life in all of its forms and all of its ability. So thank you for that question and for that comment.
It's okay. I mean, please go ahead. Yeah, we have a very least amount of questions, so I think after the participant from the Zoom, and I think I invite again a participant from this room. Please, Dr. Bukovisa.
Thank you, Dr. Adi, for the opportunity, and thank you, Dr. Miller, for your outstanding lecture today. And especially for many of your view is to strengthen the argument for the pro-life options. Yeah. And and also I do have like an impression from your mental health argument, and it's evidence-based also that you present is very great. Yeah, and also it's benefit for us in Indonesia because Indonesia is part of the pro-life view due to the law, and even in our medical oath we still preserve the phrase of respect for life start from the fertilization, and it's called by all of the medical students and also the physicians all in Indonesia. That now in global physicians pledge, we know that we don't see that anymore in the WMA recent one, and I believe it start from the 1948. Yeah, the WMA not using that respect for life from the fertilization phrase anymore. I personally do have the view of the pro-life either, but I would like to ask you in terms of the autonomy aspects of the principle for the respecting of person, and also because of this abortion things is we should consider also at the other aspect, not in only in the ethical but in the chronological frameworks, because if the pregnancy is later phase in the pregnancy, the decision could be different, and also because of Indonesia is an archipelagic country, if maybe the patient want to have the abortion, she should go abroad, right? So it should take aeroplane maybe to Europe or something, and it takes much effort, not only in the economical problems but also in the safety of the pregnancy itself, like the health certificate or something that should be addressed as well to the aeroplane. Then but if the patient herself know already all of the mental health issue that you have present, and also know about the issue in Indonesia that she couldn't do that here, and also the safety that she should go travel abroad, but she still insists, and she still have like an option to do the abortion. Yeah, and she would have a strong intention willing to go abroad to do the abortion in another country. This may raise us as an Indonesian physician to have like a conscientious objection, not only due to the pro-life view, but also the safety issue of the go to abroad and chronological issue as well. We argue to the patient, but still the patient has a strong intention. How do we respect this opinion from the patient, still on our conscious objection, but still maintain our conscious objection, and also other ethical view of pro-life? How do you respond to this?
Yeah, thank you for that very interesting question. So I guess I'll kind of go back to the first principles on autonomy and choice generally, and then come to answer the question. So of course, we think autonomy is important, and we think, people having choices where they don't harm other people is important. But we all agree that autonomy and choices should be limited where they harm other people. I mean, all of us are wearing masks, or, well, when we're not taking a drink, we're all wearing masks, because we recognize that autonomy can be limited in order to preserve life of other people. And this principle is really the same with abortion. So choice is good, but it can be limited where other people stand to be harmed by it. And I think that's true in abortion. And I also think we can reframe the choice question as, what about the choice of the child? I mean, we often think of pro-choice as being the woman has the choice to have an abortion, but we forget about the choice of the child. And even if the child is not, you know, in a very early stage, it's not conscious and it's not able to kind of make choices, when it comes to medical capacity generally, if someone is unable to make a choice temporarily, we don't just think they have no rights and kill them. So if we have a patient in a coma who is maybe GCS 4 or 5, we don't just say they have no rights, they have no choice because they can't make a choice. The fundamental principle is, firstly, this is still a human being that we should respect and treat them. And secondly, we should try to get them to a point where they can have a choice so that they can then exercise their choice. And again, the same is true with a baby, that maybe it cannot make a choice to live at a moment, but it's still a human being and it's still something which can have a choice that we should facilitate getting it to that point. So that's kind of how I'd frame it, as well as all the stuff I shared earlier about the ways in which legalized abortion has actually removed choices for women in many ways. So then to come to the more difficult kind of policy question, I think on conscientious objection, it's worth kind of thinking firstly clearly about what conscientious objection is. So it's often framed by people who oppose conscientious objection as a physician's preference. I don't want to do this, and I'm putting my own preferences above the needs of the patient. But I think that is a completely wrong way to view conscientious objection. I think conscientious objection is first and foremost about the physician's right to do what he genuinely thinks is in the best interest of his patient. And in the case of abortion, you have multiple levels of objection. There's firstly, it's not in the ethical interest of the patient. It's not in the ethical interest of the doctor to do that. And it's often or usually not in the medical interest of the patient. There's no evidence that it actually improves her mental health or usually her physical health. And so conscientious objection fundamentally is about a doctor using his or her clinical expertise and ethical judgment and professionalism to say, I genuinely don't think this is good medicine. It's not a kind of preference that you just kind of wipe your hands of something and say, I'm not having anything to do with it, but you go and do it elsewhere. And this is why the question about referral is so important, because if you really don't think something is good for a patient, you don't tell him or her to go to another doctor to get it. If a man demands that that you take his intestines out because they're hurting or whatever, he demands that you take the whole bowel out of him. You don't just say, I disagree, I think that's bad medicine, but go and see my friend who will do this for you. Or at least I hope you don't. I'm sure you don't. So conscientious objection really is about doing what is genuinely good medicine and in the best interests of the patient and the best interests of the medical profession and the patient-doctor relationship. And so I think that's very important. And so I suppose what I would say is, in that case, whether you're referring to a doctor in the same country or whether you're referring to a doctor overseas or encouraging someone to go overseas, if you genuinely think that abortion is not good for a woman because it won't help her mental health, it won't be good ethically for her, it could leave her with guilt, and you think it's not medicine, then I think the appropriate thing to do is to not facilitate anyone going anywhere for an abortion. I suppose the bigger ethical question is, do you do something like tell the police? And that's inevitably a difficult ethical question, and I don't know if I would. It's partly a difficult question, I think, because I don't know the law in Indonesia. So in many countries, abortion is illegal, but women are not prosecuted. Like in Malta, abortion is completely illegal, but no woman ever goes to jail. And I think that's right. I think abortion should be prohibited, but the law and the judicial system should have compassion and mercy towards a woman who finds herself in that situation. And I think that's a good balance to have. So I suppose by waiting until you're the doctor in that position, you're sort of waiting for a bad situation or a difficult situation to come along. Whereas maybe one thing that can be done is actually think about what policy can we put in place to avoid this situation. If a woman has reasons for having an abortion, is it possible that as the doctor, I could refer her to a confidential agency which gives her not just the medical support, but the financial support, the social support, which gives her information about her rights and so on, in a way that is confidential so that she's not at risk of having a criminal investigation at a difficult time? Maybe that's a way that at a policy level, you could frame the policy so that you preserve the protection of life in law, which I think is crucially important, but you also give women an opportunity to genuinely explore her concerns and her difficulties in a way which supports her to get through them without her being at risk of prosecution because she has actually come to someone to discuss it. I think maybe that can be something that can be suggested and has been done in some countries to an extent. So yeah, I know it's not the perfect answer for an immediate clinical situation, but I think sometimes shaping the policy, taking a step back can be more helpful. So yeah, I hope that makes some sense.
If you don't mind, I would like to also ask you technically in one sequence to do the action that if the patient want to go abroad and they ask and insist the physician to make the health certificate for her, that is she will safe travel to abroad. Maybe the physician do the examination and feel okay, you are safe to travel, but also know that the intention of the travel is the patient want to have the abortion abroad. And maybe we do not have like a conscious objection for the health certificate because we also feel the patient safe to go abroad, but because we know also the intention that the patient want to have the abortion abroad, and we do have the objection of that. How we respond in this kind of condition?
I suppose, yeah, it's again a good question that I haven't had before, so it is a challenge. I think what I would say is that maybe the most helpful way to think about most hard questions when it comes to abortion is just to aim for consistency on human equality. So think of a parallel situation where someone is going to do something similar, but they're going to do it to an adult human being. So for example, if you say, you know, in the case of a woman who doesn't want a child because she has financial difficulties, is it okay to end the life of her 5-year-old child because she wants to save money to spend on her other children? And that, you know, it might be that her other children are very desperate, but we would still say, no, you can't end the life of a 5-year-old child so that she can feed her other children better. And so the same principle applies with abortion, that if we believe in human equality, we treat them with the same principles. Now, that might mean in some cases we treat them slightly differently because of the different circumstances, but the same principles should apply in each situation. And so with this sort of situation, I suppose you could ask something like, what if someone has told you that they are going to go abroad to do something illegal, or something, in some cases, something really that violates a human right of someone else? Maybe they're going to abroad to fight for the Islamic State, for example. Do you give them a certificate to say that they are safe to fly? Well, it would be honest, you're not lying, and you're not kind of directly endorsing what they're going to do, but many people would still hesitate, even though you're telling the truth. You know, sometimes facilitating something just by telling the truth is not necessarily the right thing to do. You don't have to lie, you don't have to say they're unfit, you just refuse to have anything to do with it. And so it probably depends on your view on that other kind of situation. If someone came to you and said, I want to go fight for Islamic State, and I'm not saying by any means that having an abortion and fighting for Islamic State are the same kind of thing. I know that the motivations are completely different, and I'm not putting people in the same camp. I know that abortion is much more in desperation in many cases. But in terms of the principle, do you facilitate someone going abroad to do something seriously wrong that ends the life of another human being, to an extent, it depends on your conscience and what your conscience will allow, but using those other analogies, I think, will help to arrive at a decision for yourself. So for me, I feel like if I were in that position, no, I wouldn't do a certificate. But I would want to be able to provide her with support there and then, and I would want to be able to refer her to another support service that could give her ongoing discussion and support as well. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
I know we have, sorry, I just say, I know we have one of our colleagues who was saying there's only a few minutes left.
Yes, I think I will raise another question from the Zoom chat rooms. I think this is because first question from Dr. Ardi Saifuddin, and also about when we talk about in the countries who legalize, illegalize or not legalize abortion, do you think it will be fair to also implement a law that the biological father should taking care of? I mean, from this morning we haven't talked about what's the responsibility for the biological father, and also from the Dr. Ardi and also Dr. and Sydney Chandra also mentioning about what your point of view about abortion for women who get pregnant due to rape. I mean, this is after we could say that abortion could be viewed as a way out to help children to have a brighter future, because we don't want her to be an underage mother. Okay.
Sure.
Two more questions.
Thank you. I will try my best to answer those in the very short space of time we have remaining. So the first question on, sorry, remind me the first, it was on
RD and
father's responsibility.
Their responsibility for the biological father.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And, you know, part of what I shared about the impact of abortion legalization on society was that by legalizing abortion, that itself removes the responsibility for the father, because the father can now say it's your body and your choice and your responsibility and your burden. And what has happened in reality is that there has been a move away from father's responsibility because abortion has been legalized. Now, so banning abortion inherently provides some level of responsibility for fathers, and we see that empirically. We see that fathers are much more likely to stay involved in their child's life. They're much more likely to financially support the child and the mother. They're much less likely to get into crime and violent crime and drugs if they have a child and if they are responsible for that child, if abortion is banned. But there are other things that the government can do on top of that. For example, in the United States, at the moment, they're introducing what's something called the Unborn Child Support Act. And this means that the father has to pay child support, not just from birth, as usual, but the father has to pay child support from conception, because the mother doesn't just have responsibilities for the child when it's born, she has to go through pregnancy. And this is a child that she is taking care of inside of her own body. And for a father to kind of get off without any responsibility during that period is wrong. And women are right to protest that they have too much responsibility on their shoulders. And so I would say absolutely the father should be forced to have the same kind of responsibility for the child, because both of them have done something to be responsible for that child and they're both parents. So I think it's deeply unequal to expect the woman to shoulder these responsibilities and burdens alone. I think we have to say that the father has an equal responsibility. Now, that responsibility won't be shown in the same way. The father can never be pregnant themselves, but they can provide financially, they can provide with childcare after the child is born, they can provide in many other ways to ease the load for the woman. And I think that it's a central part of pro-life policy, and is, I think, central to keeping families together and strengthening society so that children are born in the best environment possible. It says we only have 1 minute left, so I will say on the very important question of if the woman is the victim of rape, the first thing to say, of course, is that this is a horrendous situation, and it's always, I think, grieving to me when pro-lifers respond just by saying, yes, but it's a child, because it doesn't fully respond to the level of trauma that women experience when they're the victim of such a horrendous crime. And I think first and foremost, we have to have a women-centered approach that understands just how horrific this is. We should do everything we can to prevent rape, to prosecute rape, and to deal with the consequences so that the woman can be healed as well as possible and as quickly as possible. There's a huge amount that could be said about this, so I won't be able to really say anything, but I would say two things just as an overview. The first is that ultimately we do have to look at what is the best way to heal a woman from that situation. And when you look at the empirical evidence, especially the mental health evidence I showed earlier, there's no evidence that abortion is helpful to a woman's mental health after she has been the victim of such a crime. Whereas women who have been in that situation and kept a child, they often say it was very difficult, of course, but the child helped me to recover from that trauma because the child gave me meaning in that trauma. And I think keeping women's voices front and center is important. And there's a wonderful book called Victims and Victors by David Reardon, which goes through just the testimonies of women after woman after woman who has been the victim of a horrendous abuse and either had an abortion or given birth. And it just shares their stories. And their stories will be far more compelling than me speaking about it as a man. I'm never going to be able to kind of fully understand or explain such a horrendous situation. But these women do in their own words with their own experiences. And I think they give a very different picture to what you would expect. The expectation we have, particularly as men, is that if a rape happens, the best thing is just to have an abortion and everything will be okay. But what we have to do is listen to women who have been in that situation and hear what they say. And actually what they say is very surprising and actually does push people towards life. So I think that's profoundly important. So all of the evidence on that is on my website. So I know, I can never give an answer on this particular question in 2 minutes because it's a huge question with a lot of trauma and a lot of grief and sensitivity. But I say a lot more on my website on that question, and I hope that's helpful. So thank you for that question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Miller. To conclude this session, I will summarize some of the key points from our talks discussion today. Because first, the increase of number of abortion in UK due to mental health reasons instead of clinical or emergency conditions, so that might raise our awareness on abortion. And also the what makes we should view the embryos or conceptions as a potential human beings, and also as a human beings. What makes us people valuable is it's not what we the embryo or the humans becomes, but also it is an equally intrinsic value that we also that shared among the human beings, and also all humans are equally valuable. The third is and also how we support these pregnant women who will the abortion become a medication or treatments, but we need to view it as and support the pregnant women in a comprehensive way, including giving a responsibility not only on the shoulder of the women, but also among the other government institution, and also the father who has also have equal responsibility. I think that's a very a large discussion that we have here. Thank you very much, Dr. Miller. And I think we could give applause for Dr. Miller here. Thank you very much. And for all the participants for this very fruitful discussion who attend in this Senat Academic Fakultas room, and also join us from the Zoom and YouTube. Thank you very much. I'm as the moderator, I'll give back this session to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ade, and our sincere thanks to Dr. Miller for the outstanding presentation and discussion. Please give them another round of applause. Welcome, Prof. Ari, our Dean of Faculty. Thank you for attending this guest lecture.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, for the last speech of our lecture today, we are honored to welcome the Dean of Faculty of Medicine, University of Indonesia, Professor Dr. Ari Fahrial Syam, to give his closing speech in our event today. And here is his curriculum vitae on the screen. Okay, please welcome Prof. Ari to the stage.
Okay, thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Calum Miller, for your outstanding presentation, lecture, and discussion as well. And also for Dr. Ade as a head of Forensic and Medical Legal Science Department, Faculty of Medicine of Indonesia, and also a senior lecturer from Neurology, Dr. Pukopisa, and also participant not only here in Senate room, but also in YouTube and also in Zoom. I know maybe around more than 100 participants follow your lecture this morning. This is good. And also, I just give you information that actually we have a good collaboration with Oxford. I think until now around 10 years. So we have still collaboration with Oxford, and I mentioned to you that we have one facility, laboratory, here in our campus, working together between our scientists and your scientists from Oxford. So thank you for good collaboration between your university and also to us as well. And about the topics, I think this is important topics. And I saw you in some interview in YouTube as well. So I think you are one of the famous person who pro-life and also always talk about the abortion. I think until now, in Indonesia regulations still ban for abortion. So you know, like actually we as one of the older Faculty of Medicine, this building I think more than 100 years. So I think this is the important for us always uphold about the ethics standard. And also I give you information that for our student, we have a module for ethics as well. And I'm as a vice president of Indonesian's Faculty of Medicine here in Indonesia, we have a regulation that every Faculty of Medicine have one of lecture who always talk about the ethics. So we said that the ethics teachers. So every Faculty of Medicine here in Indonesia, right now we have around 92 Faculty of Medicine. So they have what we call that the ethics teachers. So that's why we always uphold about this matter. Again, thank you very much for your discussion, and I think, and also for the organizing committee, and also all the participants. I hope that events such as this will foster future collaboration between our institution. Thank you for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Ari. And as our Dean, Prof. Ari would like to give a certificate for Dr. Miller and also Dr. Ade. Dr. Miller for his sharing for expertise in the session, and also Dr. Ade for his superb moderation in our session. Okay, thank you. Dr. Ade and Dr. Miller, would you please come again? Here is some souvenir for a warm gesture from University. Okay, thank you, Prof. Ari. Okay. So thank you, Dr. Miller, Prof. Ari, and also Dr. Ade for this extremely valuable session we had with you all. May both Indonesia and UK will gain more awareness on the bioethics problem in abortion. Dear participants, we are happy to inform you that Dr. Miller will be staying in Jakarta for the next few days and also giving more lectures in few others esteemed medical faculties. May we wish for his success and good luck, and may you enjoy your stay in our country, Doctor. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so this is the end of our guest lecture for today. On behalf of all panelists and organizers, we thank you for your participation and apologize for any mistakes we made during this session. And for your information, if there's anything you missed from our event today, please don't worry because you can rewatch the recording from Medicine UI YouTube page. I'm Olga.
And I am Nadia. And that is all from us today. Have a great rest of your day and until next time.
Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.